Please take a moment to notice the clearly lit emergency exit signs at the front and back of the theater and to locate the exit nearest you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for coming. You did locate the exit nearest you. There's also a life vest under your seat. If we could come down over water. And we'll coming by the carts with the beverage service in a little bit. I thought I might invite, we have an intimate crowd. The weather is lovely. They're really missing out though, because what's going to go on in here is going to be really, really wonderful and interesting. But I might invite the folks who are in the back there. There's a lot of room up here, and it might be a nice opportunity to come down and sit a little closer. So I'm going to invite you to do that. Not instructing you, but inviting. But this is really one of my favorite events that we do in the entire reunion weekend. You know, we've been doing a lot of things in the Teach It Forward campaign that are interesting and fun. I think the most significant one, and the one around which I found the very most energy, is the focus on the contributions of all kinds of women in our alumni body. And we have had gatherings of women alumni. We have had large and small across the country. You know, what I was thinking about when we started this campaign was that at the start of the last campaign, the women who had graduated from Williams, with Kathie's exception, were in a generation that really had not yet, it was kind of halfway through their careers and their lives. And people, if we started the last campaign about 25, 27 years after the first women graduated from Williams, so that would have put them in their late 40s. And now we're 15 years later. And so we have a whole generation of women who have finished their careers or in the later parts of their careers, and where their contributions to the world and the impact of their Williams educations is clearer and fuller. And it's really exciting to see that as we kind of grow into our alumni body over these decades. And you know, the Board of Trustees is now half women. The senior staff is more than half women. We're a really different place, and we've become a really different place in important ways over the last 30 years. As I said yesterday morning at the Eat from Williams breakfast, which really seems like a long time ago to me, you know, the decision by the college to become coeducational saved it from mediocrity and irrelevance. And I think that has been borne true. That was clear at the time, but it has been borne out by what's happened over these last decades. And it is simply a silly thing to say that we wouldn't be the same college that we are today if we hadn't made that decision. We would be a ridiculous anachronism if we had not made that decision. So this is an opportunity to explore some of the accomplishments of four of women graduates, and it seems kind of silly to have only four, but we only have an hour. So we have four folks who are back here for their reunions, and we're going to share some of their experiences, I think, at Williams and at afterwards. You know, the student body is half women, of course. Our faculty is more than 40% women. That turns over more slowly, and we're going through a period at the college of renewal of the faculty, where we're hiring about 100 faculty over a period of 7 or 8 years, and that just has to do with the many retirements that we had, the many retirements that we have now and the much hiring that we did about 30 years ago. And this is a generational opportunity for us to bring diversity to the faculty so that the faculty represents what the student body has already become, and that is all kinds of diversity, but very much so, particularly in fields in which women have been historically underrepresented. It's very, very important to bring gender diversity to the faculty. So one of the things I'm the most thrilled about in my own field, in physics, 8 faculty in the physics department. We had 1 woman on the faculty. The problem with Sarah Bolton is that she can do too many things too well. So she became the dean of the college, and she became the president now of the College of Worcester, and then we had no women on the faculty in the physics department. And now we just hired a cohort of 3, and 3 terrific young scientists. And suddenly we've transformed that department. That's now a department that's 3/8 women faculty. So you have to seize these moments, and we are trying to seize them as best we can here at the college. It is, of course, more than about numbers. It's about climate. It's about what it is actually like to live here, what it's like to work here, what it's like to be a student here, what it's like to teach here. And I think we know that there's a lot of work left to be done, and we're committed to doing that work so that the experience of being a woman here at Williams is every bit as positive as the experience of being a man is at Williams. And that just requires constant attention and work and self-examination and listening to people's experiences. And I'll say there's one thing, the one tool we have at Williams that I think we rely on more than anything else and more successfully is a willingness and an eagerness to listen to each other's experiences. And we have to continue to do that. So this is a day about listening to people's experiences of all kinds, and I'd like to just say a word about our four panelists. There's biographical information in the pamphlet, and so I'm not going to read it, because that would seem to be a waste of your time. But let me say a word about each of them, just working my way down the line here. So first is Kathie Berry from the class of 1957. Yes, the class of 1957. So Kathie began her college career as a student at Vassar, and then she met and fell in love with a Williams student, Charles Berry, also the class of 1957. And they married before their junior year, and then she moved to Williamstown. So she describes her time and spent time here at the college. She describes her time at Williams fondly. She often dined at Charles's fraternity house. And she does, however, recall having to steer clear of one professor who did not want women in his classroom. I'm sorry, this is what, I'm sure you have a lot more than that. And over the years, so I apologize for that. You can just repeat, no one's listening to me anyway. So over the years, Kathie has held almost every possible alumni volunteer position at the college. And since we started tracking in the early 1980s, she's participated in over 70 Williams-related events and activities. And this was all recognized in 2007 with the college's absolute highest award for alumni service, the Rogerson Cup. So it's great to have you here. So Shayla Harris from the class of 1997. So throughout her career as a multimedia journalist, Shayla has covered a wide range of topics, including racial profiling in Cincinnati, immigration in Sweden, and the life and death of NHL enforcer Derek Bogard. She's taught and lectured at graduate journalism classes and conferences at NYU, CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, Columbia, Missouri School of Journalism, and many others. She returns to Williams often to mentor and support students who are interested in careers in media and journalism, and serves on the board of the Jeffrey Owen Jones Class of '66 Fellowship in Journalism here at Williams. So, and before I move on to Laura, I have to say a word about Jeffrey Jones Class of 1966. The single coolest story, I'm sorry, I have to tell you this. The single coolest thing I learned about this college when I got here is that Jeffrey Jones, Class of '66, although it may have been 64, this may be a typo here, is Mr. Jones in Ballad of a Thin Man by Bob Dylan. He was interviewing Bob Dylan in 64, I guess, and for some magazine, maybe The Village Voice, I think. And he didn't get it. He was this kid from Williams, this kind of, you know, and he interviewed Dylan, kind of, what's going on here? And Dylan wrote a song about this guy who came in and something's going on, but you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones? So that is the single coolest Williams fact there is. So Laura Spero, class of 2002. Also very cool. Every Thanksgiving since 2006, Laura rallies families and businesses in her hometown of Bethesda for a race to raise money for oral health care in Nepal. And while at Williams, she also discovered audio production, and her freelance radio work has aired on Marketplace, Weekend America, The World Vision Report, and Public Radio International's The World. Laura spent a year at Ground Zero and a month in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina as a facilitator for the StoryCorps National Oral History Project. So welcome, Laura. And finally, Soraya Membreno, class of 2012. When Soraya, When Soraya accepted her Williams offer, she notes that she did not realize that, quote, she was saying yes to 4 years in a town with 1 street light, the lowest concentration of people of color she would ever live in, and no pollo tropical. Soraya writes about issues of accessibility, representation, and culture-straddling identity building in literature and academia. Her compelling piece about preparing for commencement as a first-generation college student, which I just read yesterday, it's a marvelous, amazing piece, was often shared among Williams students in the past couple of weeks. Among her many writing credits, Soraya contributed to a collection about the racial imaginary edited by fellow poet, Williams alum, MacArthur Genius Grant winner, Claudia Rankine, class of 1986. So welcome, Soraya. And with that, I'm going to turn the panel over to the panelists.
Thank you, Adam. I'm often called a pioneer, but here with this panel of young women, I feel like the dinosaur. Actually, I never did think of myself as a pioneer. I'm not a pioneering woman. I did not set out to break down any barriers or to start anything new. All of these first woman things just sort of happened to me. How did it happen? Well, back in the 50s, many of us attended single-gender colleges. And every weekend, there was this huge migration of students who traveled from the colleges for women to the colleges for men. And as Adam said, I was a student at Vassar, and my husband, Charlie, was a student here at Williams. We met our freshman year on a blind date at Vassar. After spending most of our sophomore year at either Williams or at Vassar, we decided to marry just before our junior year. Now, early marriages were not that unusual in those days. Many of my classmates from Vassar were married before they graduated. A lot of them dropped out of college. Sadly, to earn a degree from Vassar in those days, it was necessary for women to be in residence their senior year. That means living in the dorm. My intention when we married was to complete my education at Bennington, which all of you know is just up the road a bit. However, after a few days of classes at Bennington, I realized that the academic program there was just not the right fit for me, but I didn't know what to do. So together, Charlie and I went to Dean Brooks for advice. And Dean Brooks listened quietly to my story. Then he opened his arms and said, "Why don't you come to Williams?" He explained that although Williams was a college that conferred degrees only upon men, ever since World War II, the college had allowed women who were wives of students, wives of professors, or residents of the town to take courses for credit. And over the years, there had been a few women who had taken a course or two for credit. I just happened to be the first woman who took a full schedule of courses here at Williams. Nobody called me a pioneer then. But I'm often asked, what was it like? There were a few married students here at Williams, and we all lived in apartments scattered around the town. I felt welcome. I felt warmly welcomed all over the college by students and by professors, and as my husband likes to say, I was treated like one of the guys. As Adam said, there was an exception. At Vassar, I was majoring in American history and literature. But at Williams, there was a professor who taught American literature who refused to have a girl in his class. So I changed my major to economics. It's amusing now, but it was okay then. I didn't feel discriminated against in any way. As a matter of fact, I felt extremely grateful to Williams. Williams was making it possible for me to complete my undergraduate education. And at the time of single-gender colleges, that was an enlightened attitude. Although I was the only woman in any of my classes, the professors treated me like all the other students. I tried hard to fit in, but it really was easy. I never experienced any problems whatsoever in the classroom or with my written work. The other students were welcoming too. We discussed our assignments, we traded textbooks and class notes, and we studied for exams together. Academic life at Williams was the same as academic life at Vassar. Outside the classroom, I felt comfortable too. Fraternities were very strong at Williams at the time, and Charlie was a member of the DU fraternity. I had an open invitation to the DU house, and we ate many of our meals there. And as a matter of fact, during the fall of our senior year, I was even asked by the fraternity members for help with rushing activities. I also helped with resettlement of a Hungarian refugee family that the DU fraternity had sponsored to come to live in Williamstown after the Hungarian Revolution. Other friends in other fraternities welcomed me too. We spent many nights at Fraternity House for dinner on their guest nights or for their weekend parties. I did not expect to receive a degree from Williams, but I eventually did, thanks to the amazing support which was initiated by Dean Brooks. Unbeknownst to me, sometime toward the end of our senior year, Dean Brooks went to the Board of Trustees and advocated on my behalf. He made the case that I had done excellent academic work at two of our nation's finest colleges, and I had fulfilled all the requirements for a major in economics. But neither Vassar nor Williams was going to award me a degree. He claimed to the trustees that this short-sightedness was a reflection on the nation's current educational system. So the Board of Trustees agreed to award me a certificate, the first certificate, the equivalent of a Williams College degree. So it was not until the 1970s, when Williams began to confer degrees upon women, that my certificate was replaced with a real, genuine diploma from Williams. I was declared officially a member of my class of 1957 and a member of the Alumni Society. I certainly didn't expect at that time to become the president of the Alumni Society. But by the late 1980s, many women, of course, had received a real degree from Williams, but they were not yet well represented at the leadership levels of the Alumni Society. They were considered too young. So the college asked me, as a much older alumna with a career and with a family, to serve as the Society's first woman president. I was honored to do so. It was an extraordinary privilege to serve as president of the Alumni Society. Charlie and I made many close friends with members of the class of 1930s to the 1990s and on the board of trustees and the college administrators. And in our den at home, I have hanging on the wall a framed poem which was written for me by members of the executive committee of the Society of Alumni. The title of the poem is "To Kathie Berry, Our First Lady." I love this reminder of those happy years as president of your alumni society. In closing, I want to make two brief points. The first is that the 1950s, when I was a college student, was not a time for pioneers. The feminists came later. For us in the 1950s, living the dream meant a house in the suburbs, 2 or 3 children, a station wagon, and a dog. Second point is that while my experience is unusual, Williams deserves great credit for breaking the mold. With people like Dean Brooks, the college did not cling to its single-gender traditions. Rather, it looked very closely at its current educational policies, and it also took good care of its individual students. So, pioneer or not, dinosaur or not, I'm grateful and proud to be part of the famous Williams family.
Thank you, Kathie, for your inspiring words. It's truly an honor to be included in this impressive and distinguished lineup of multi-generational speakers. When I graduated 20 years ago, it was definitely not a foregone conclusion that I, the granddaughter and daughter of Midwestern auto workers, would be up here on this stage. I was a fairly undistinguished member of the class of 1997. And I believe there are a few of my distinguished classmates sitting out there in the audience. So the class of 1997, make yourself known. And I was probably one of the few to not become a management consultant immediately after graduation. I didn't even have a job at graduation. But as I reflect on the past few decades, nothing about my life or career has ever really followed an obvious path. In fact, my journey has been about my efforts to navigate the fraught space between two competing ideas of how to be in the world. Are you an insider or are you an outsider? It's a question that some of you may have even asked yourselves. In some ways, I've been a complete insider who went to the right elite schools, spoke the language, and knew the right people. But in many other important ways, I am also a total outsider who wouldn't normally be in the room where it happens. Case in point, the year I was born, Williams was largely white and male, with a sprinkling of women for good measure. Like both my parents, I was born in Buffalo, New York, a city that has become a sad punchline for failure. While I grew up in a home filled with books, music, film, and stimulating conversations about the news of the day, there were no framed college degrees or overt signifiers of educational success. So as a bookish young Black girl who always did well on standardized tests, I didn't have many models of how to be in the world. Certainly not at the predominantly white school I attended far away from my neighborhood and family, and where one of these kids was definitely not like the others. Emotionally, this in-between space was not always an easy place to be. So as a means of escape, I became interested in journalism and storytelling at an early age. As the editor-in-chief of my esteemed high school newspaper, I enjoyed taking pictures and getting to learn about other people's lives. At graduation, my classmates scribbled in the margins of my senior yearbook, "We'll look for your byline in the New York Times." Like them, I also had visions of my name smudged on the fingers of voracious readers of the paper of record. The only question was, would it be simply Shayla Harris or a more dignified S.J. Harris? I wanted to be the best at the best, the ultimate insider. Naturally, I chose Williams College. But at Williams, something changed. I bristled at doing what was expected of me and joining the college newspaper, so I didn't. It was the 90s, and a liberal arts education meant experimentation and pushing the boundaries of one's sexual, racial, and political identities. I had come to Williams to find more people like me, smart overachievers, and was quickly disillusioned when I didn't see the diversity within myself or my experiences reflected in the curriculum or the student body. By now, this painful feeling of not belonging was not new. So in an effort to get in where I thought I could fit in, I spent my junior year immersed in the developing world in the Caribbean and Africa to study the role of women in politics. Unlike Williams, everyone looked like me, but my status as an American citizen allowed me certain privileges that made the color of my skin completely beside the point. It was a humbling experience. I didn't know then, but that moment was a turning point in my life. I slowly began to appreciate this ability to see and understand both the positive and negative effects of privilege. And instead of forcing myself to decide between being either an insider or an outsider, I could embrace being both an insider and an outsider. It was the perfect foundation for being a journalist. The best storytellers see things in ways that others cannot and provide deep emotional insights into the lives of others. I could use my unique perspective and access to bring outsiders in. Through my documentaries, I could share my globe-trotting experiences with my father, and with my family, particularly my father, who after stepping off the plane from a traumatic tour in Vietnam, refused to ever leave America again. With my camera, I could immerse myself in the lives of a passionate African-American teacher and her students in urban Atlanta, or a young first-generation Muslim American woman grappling with cancer, or a Canadian hockey player who paid too high a price for his violent role in sport, and share their stories and humanity with thousands. And over the course of my career, this skill has allowed me to carve out spaces in prestigious newsrooms for a brown-skinned lady who doesn't see lines or boundaries. For example, while working within network television, I helped to pioneer the hybrid model of a field producer who shoots, because I was looking for ways to bridge both the creative and editorial processes. And yes, for nearly a decade, my byline was in the New York Times. But instead of ink, it was rendered in pixels and in a digital position that didn't exist a decade ago. My presence in award-winning online documentaries there challenged people's assumptions about what a Times reporter looked like, what a Times reporter did, and redefined all the news that was fit to print, download, and stream. But as I said earlier, nothing about my life or career has ever really followed an obvious path. Recently, I moved on from the New York Times and left a high-profile job at Frontline PBS. Why? For most of my life, my goal had been to be the best at the best and bring marginalized voices into elite spaces. But in retrospect, I realized that I was focusing my energies in the wrong direction, outside in rather than inside out. What kind of storyteller would I be if I could infuse my visual journalism with my passion for art, photography, and fashion, free from the narrow expectations of a particular news organization? How could I redefine success on my own terms and stop translating my vision using someone else's language? Now, as an independent filmmaker, I'm slowly stepping out into the world and finding new ways to gain critical knowledge and connections with people who are searching for the same things that I am. I am at another turning point in my life, and like the last one, it may involve getting a little lost before I'm found again. Of course, I have some doubts and many fears, but as I move towards the future, I can now, with some confidence, answer that question I asked at the beginning. Are you an insider or an outsider? Today, on this stage, I am the right person in the right place. Thank you.
Thanks, Shayla. I'm going to make an attempt to include some technology here. We'll hope that it goes well. So here's what Women of Williams was for me. I've been a competitive athlete my whole life, but there is nothing in this world quite like the experience of a college team. And before I get into this talk, I want to acknowledge Carl Samuelson, Steve Custer, and Justin Moore, who were my coaches and mentors while I was here at Williams, and B. Fuller, Williams class of 1983, who was my high school soccer coach, college counselor, and all-around idol. In the early 2000s, there was actually a lot of controversy over the role of athletics at Williams, but on the varsity swimming and rowing teams, that never made sense to us. For us, being a woman of Williams was to be fearless, strong, connected, and brilliant. Forget traditional feminism. We pondered matters of marriage equality and non-binary gender identity. I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I came to Williams, so I took classes in literally every single department here. And at the end of my sophomore year, I still couldn't decide on a major, so I just didn't declare one. I'm actually not sure how I was able to register for fall classes. And finally, during the winter break of my junior year, I sat down on a couch and I read the Williams College course catalog from cover to cover. I circled every class that I would like to take in my remaining 3 semesters, and then I went back to figure out which major would allow me to take the greatest number of those classes. And it turned out to be anthropology with a concentration in neuroscience. And I was like, anthropology? I was like, who majors in what even is that? But it turned out to be a great major for me. And in an English class that spring, I took a course called Documentary Technologies, where I learned how to use a digital audio recorder. And I became hooked. I started carrying the recorder with me everywhere, picking up interesting little bits of life. And throughout this process, I never, even for one fleeting instant, considered what I would do with my degree after I graduated. On a fall morning my senior year, I was writing a paper in my room when our coxswain, Emily, came running in the door. She said, "A plane just flew into the World Trade Center, and another into the Pentagon." That night, I remember the crowded chapel, the candlelight vigil, and how crew practice was canceled, but in our shock, we all came down to the erg room anyway. In all of the confusion, rowing was familiar and secure. 6 weeks after 9/11, I went to Ground Zero myself. By late October, it was already cold and people's bodies were pressed together behind blocks of barricades in a mass of disbelief, voyeuristic intrigue, and grief. I didn't think to bring anything with me to pay respects except for myself, my recorder, and my camera. No cards, no flowers, nothing. I just had to touch it. I felt a deep and pressing need to bear witness. I came to Williams from privilege, and I was a restless student. All of my friends from home had been expected to attend top colleges, and we had all been exceptionally well-trained to perform in an academic setting. During my college years, something in me was ravenous and discontent. At the time, I didn't have the language to talk about privilege and power. I just sensed that I had been given tremendous advantages, and I didn't understand them. That winter, I heard George W. Bush use the phrase axis of evil in the State of the Union address. So in the spring, for my senior seminar in anthropology, I decided to interview elderly people about their memories of Pearl Harbor. Most were World War II vets, and what I wanted to know was whether patriotism is something that only comes about from acts of violence. On the day I was supposed to present my 25-minute audio documentary to my class, I missed my presentation because I was sitting in the media lab cursing at the computer, which wouldn't properly export the file. I sprinted into Griffin an hour late, stood up in front of a mostly empty room, and then I couldn't get the documentary to play. Well, who says you don't get second chances? I want to present you with a 2-minute excerpt from Patriots, recorded in March of 2002, and in the background, you can hear the audio that I recorded at Ground Zero.
What correlation do you have with the flag and 9/11? The flag has been here since 1776, you know.
What are we saying when we hang the flag?
Go America, go.
I put out a flag years and years, not just on 4th of July. I liked it out there.
I am a patriot. I don't have to tell you. If I have to tell you, then I'm not.
So why do people tell each other?
Because they have to reassure each other.
Isn't that patriotism?
No. Did you ever hear the word hypocritical?
Things are probably going to happen soon. We've waited long enough.
They're aware, but don't tell me that they are willing to give up anything.
Should we be having flags out now? Is that what it is? Are we involved now in patriotism, justice, or is it revenge? I think it's more and more the latter two, and it worries me. But it's still out there, and I've been wondering whether I should bring it in.
Back there is the remains of Tower 1, and Tower 2 is off to the left.
It's a fad. It'll leave like everything else. They haven't felt the calamity yet. It isn't there yet.
Then why are they putting flags on their car?
That's your neighbor does. Their friends do. I got a guy in back who's got 4 of them on his car.
Why?
Now, what does he need 4 for?
Are today's youth less patriotic?
I don't think they're less patriotic. They've never been stirred to the point where they're going to have an uprising like Pearl Harbor, of course.
What can we give up in times of peace?
Get involved. You know, we all have to contribute. We can't let the other guy do it. It's time you young people stood up and started to be counted.
This was the world that we graduated into, just 8 months after 9/11, 18 months before the start of the Iraq War, 4 years before the iPhone, and 6 years before the housing crash. I did what any reasonable person would do. I Googled "go to Nepal" and ended up as a volunteer teacher in a village called Kathie, where I had absolutely no training, did not speak the language, was not getting paid, and in an extravagant act of indulgence, I was totally sure that I would be adopted into some household in the hills of Nepal, and there I would make friends. I had no idea how this would happen, and yet that never struck me as a problem. As it turned out, I was adopted into a one-room household of all women, a widowed mom and 2 daughters about my age. I threw myself into everyday tasks, doing field work with the neighbors, carrying stuff on my head, and I picked up Nepali language relatively quickly by ear. I did stuff like join mass outings to the forest to chop down firewood. And you can totally picture the 5'8" white girl running around with a sickle in the middle of this scene. I just kind of threw myself into things, and before long, people started coming to the house where I lived to ask for help with all sorts of stuff. So I became kind of a listener of extremely random problems. And one of the most common requests I got was for help with dental pain. Now, this started happening often enough that I began to look into it, and what I found out is that oral disease was one of the most widespread health problems in the country, and it has a significant impact on people's health and quality of life. So I started problem solving with the people who I already worked with, which was local teachers in this village, and our efforts evolved over time and became Javaya Oral Health Care. Our program uses a community-based model to establish high-quality dental care in very traditional settings with no electricity or running water. We've established 8 rural dental clinics that serve an area of about 50,000 people, and they're all completely run by locals in their villages. Now we're trying to get this model absorbed into the national healthcare system of Nepal, which contains over 3,000 health posts and serves over 20 million people. Most agencies that do this kind of work are huge multinational organizations with budgets in the hundreds of millions. Our staff is 4 Nepali people, me, and handfuls of people working in their own communities. Out of nearly 100,000 NGOs, we're the only one building sustainable primary dental care in Nepal. Now, I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I'd showed up as an expert. I work in a space dominated by paternalistic, saviorist institutions. But I didn't go to Nepal to start a dental project. I went to make relationships and to get adopted. I still live with the same widow in the same mud plaster house. This is a very recent picture. And my job is still mostly just suggesting ideas and getting corrected and collaborating. And it's still chopping wood and carrying water in baskets and developing a connection with the life that people live in rural Nepal. It's basically just empathy. But what I can apply to that empathy is the privilege of access to the rest of the world and a Williams College education. We're conditioned to live for achievements that will pay off tomorrow or next year, or at the end of our lives looking backwards. But the risk is that the present moment becomes a contingency, with value only as long as it promises something later. And if we're not careful, we sacrifice discovery, surprise, delight, intuition, and the art of not knowing. We can grow without ever evolving, and we can serve ourselves without fully exploring how we can serve the world. To not know isn't just the stagnant absence of information, it's the presence of intention and wonder. It's showing up anyway. Not knowing has to be nurtured and given real estate that would otherwise be devoted to complacency or fear. We all need to find what makes us uncomfortable in this world and go towards it. Not knowing strips us of vanity and obsession, and it makes us listeners and seekers. Repairing this world we live in will require more of that. One last piece of audio. We won the first ever Division III NCAA rowing championship by 0.3 of a second on June 1st, 2002 in Indianapolis, less than 24 hours before our graduation in Williamstown. Izzy and Sho and I changed out of our wet unis in the car while speeding to the airport, and then the flight attendant moved us to first class and brought us champagne.
40 grand, look into her eyes, I saw tears coming down.
We came skidding into graduation the next morning, glowing in what we had made, excellence for its own sake. Just hours later, it was all done. All my belongings were packed, and I was sitting in the back of the minivan as my parents set out en route 2. Most people had jobs or internships or something. I had nothing lined up after a short summer position. I remember thinking, I have no idea what's going to happen next for the entire rest of my life.
So I came to Williams a physics kid also, so that's really great to hear. More women in the department. So my little confession to start is that I had actually something completely different written out for this, and then I got an email this week that kind of kicked off something else. So earlier this week, I got an email from a reader of the magazine that I helped publish. It read, "I appreciate the work that you do and the energy and intent of today's feminists, but I have a complaint that I feel sure will not be greeted kindly by 98% of the people reading this. I'd like to hear and read more about feminism and women in general, and less about women and people of color. I'm just emotionally exhausted having to read week after week about the problems of people of color and the problems with white privilege and white culture. I'm sure that my opinion is held by more people than just me." I too am sure that her opinion is held by more people than just her because I see it every day. I work at an independent feminist media organization, and we get a lot of emails like that, some more kindly worded than others. But in a weird way, those are the emails that are my favorite, because they allow me to recalibrate, using what has been my most cherished and kind of strange Williams lesson, a simple mantra that moments like these remind me to use. So what? To start at the beginning, I don't have a sentimental story of deciding that Williams was the one for me. I was the first in my family to go to college, the first to leave the state, still. I accepted without ever seeing the school. Williams said, "Full ride," I said, "I'm in," and that was that. Even as a kid, I was practical, I was measured, some would say boring, but I had a plan. Astrophysics major, math minor, graduate school, NASA by 30. Easy, right? What I couldn't have foreseen was that my time at Williams would be nothing like the college experiences I'd seen on TV or in movies. Instead, little perfectionist me was signing up for my own personal 4-year crash course in how to fail. And boy, did I fail, often and not very gracefully. There were the small failures, like realizing, I'm from Miami, realizing that snow, on top of being cold, was also wet. Shout out to LL Bean for literally keeping me alive. And then there were the bigger stumbles. The first problem set I couldn't do on my own. My first failed class. My series of mini existential crises before dropping a core physics class, then dropping the major altogether. But Williams was also hard in ways I didn't expect. Williams was the first place I was ever told I had an accent. It was here I learned that when people say American, they didn't mean me or my family. Here that I learned that first gen was just another word for you're doing this by yourself. You can prepare for the academic things, but what really threw me for a loop was the questions Williams asked of me that took years to answer. My favorite, it turns out, was planted way back in freshman year. I had started taking English classes as a break because in true Williams kid form, reading 3 books a week was my idea of a break. I remember a class I took with Professor John Lyman on postmodern American literature and how for the entire semester, Professor Lyman would, at the bottom of every single paper, and I wish I was exaggerating, every single paper, not marked in any other way, just there at the bottom, circled in big red letters, leave one note. The same note over and over again. So what? Not exactly the feedback you want to hear from your teacher. What did so what mean? What was I supposed to do with that? Is that a rewrite request? It took me until way after that class to realize that so what didn't mean who cares. It meant what are you going to do about it? Those 2 simple and incredibly frustrating words became a guide for me as I started navigating these first 5 years post-Williams. What was I going to do about all the uncomfortable things I learned and worked through here as a student? How was I going to make all of these little failures worthwhile? I like to think that in a lot of ways, it is now my job to ask everyone around me, so what? As the director of community at Bitch Media, we work every day to infuse feminist critique into pop culture and cultivate the next generation of feminist thinkers by interrogating the things we consume on a daily basis. TV, music, movies, apocalyptic Donald Trump Twitter alerts. But it's my job specifically to push us to continually ask about the impact of that work, to take what we do as an organization holistically and in big red letters at the very end ask, so what? Injecting feminist critique into pop culture and normalizing it in everyday discourse is like turning on a new color. When you've seen it once, you start to see it everywhere. But what happens after that? If we can talk about intersectional feminist values in pop culture that we consume, can we use that to talk about feminism and politics that govern our society? Can I use that to turn the page? Emails like the one I received earlier this week are my little confirmation that what we're doing is worth fighting for. And asking so what, going that one step further, is worth it. But as all things at Williams, it's also not that simple. It turns out, so what, also has an implied question. With who? For all the intellectual rigor that Williams demanded, all the little and not so little failures it forced us to bounce back from, it pales in comparison to the community we build here. Being here, and more specifically, failing here made me less afraid, which comes in handy in my line of work, but it's my friends that make me brave. When I got asked to say something today, I kept thinking of that phrase, women of Williams. It's a simple phrase, but I wouldn't have thought of it. I wouldn't think of myself as a woman of Williams, and what does that mean? So of course, my first thought is of my brilliant friends doing good out in the world in so many ways. But being back for our 5th year as alums for the first time, it's special to see where we fit into that legacy. Being a woman of Williams means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But it boils down, I think, to one thing. However you started when you came to Williams, we have all left as more fearless versions of ourselves. So, what are we going to do with that?
Thank you so much. It's really awesome to be able to do this every year. You get to hear all of these incredible stories, and I'm struck often and repeatedly. I got to hear these before you guys. But you know, it's really moving, and it reminds me of like the depth of this community that we are in and that we occupy and that we all care about so deeply. I just want to quickly acknowledge that in the process of building this program, there are people who I would love to come back for a reunion broadly, who just can't come back to this place because of hurt, because of trauma, because of pain. And I need us all to see that and know that and understand what that means. Because being a woman of Williams means a lot of things to a lot of people, and I think we all want to enjoy this experience equally, and we all want to thrive. So I think it would be nice if we all kind of gave a thought to the folks who aren't here, not because they have super busy lives, because a lot of people are here because they have super busy lives, but because they just can't, emotionally or otherwise. Sorry, my name is Sharifa, right? I should have said that before. I work in the Alumni Relations Office. I have the privilege of working with the alumni body and building really awesome programs like these to celebrate the diversity of our college, where we've come, how far we've come, and where we are going. So we have about 5 minutes. If anyone would like to ask questions of the panel, I'm happy to facilitate that. Don't all go at once.
Okay, I'll take a stab. I thought you brought up a really great question about maybe having representation of Muslim females, and I think all of us, to some extent, are working in a space where we are grappling with the kind of combined progress of women across race, across cultures, across religion, and realizing that we are all, connected with that the advancement of women of color, of gay women, of bisexual women, of transgender women, and certainly across religious faiths are all sort of tied to each other. So in that sense, I think celebrating women as a group, is about that. And I think we would all love to see representation of a Muslim American woman on the next panel.
Thank you. I know where there is one other question. We've a couple minutes.
I just want to thank you for acknowledging the people who can't be here, because I think that
Thank you. That's a great question. And I know Shayla has traveled a lot too, so I'm interested in her response to that. I think I went, well, so to answer your first question, I spend a few months a year in Nepal. At the moment, I'm going every summer and every winter, so like 2 to 4 months a year, but I've had periods of time where I'm there for 6 months or 9 months at a time. And I've really developed a life and a family. I really was adopted into this family. It's very much like, you know, I went there as a kid. I feel like I've grown up there. So I feel very at home there. And as far as kind of living between two worlds, I actually thought that, like, Shayla's talk spoke so much to my own experience of realizing that I am a person who lives between spaces. And so there's a loneliness in that, but I think that was there before I went to Nepal. And I think I went there to try to kind of address that feeling of you know, that thing that didn't quite fit into something. And obviously then as you do it, you realize like you don't fit more as you go. You just, you know, now I have this whole other life where I literally, you know, I'm farming rice and chopping things down and speaking in another language. So I think it's more of just accepting that that's the space that I live in this world, and that I hope that the gift that I can cultivate in myself is to be a bridge and to be a storyteller, and then to contribute, you know, what I can as somebody who has had great nourishment in my life and great opportunities, and, you know, to just do the best I can with the fact that we live in a world that is not congruent. There are huge disparities. There are things that make my Amma, who I showed a picture of there, she doesn't know who Barack Obama is. Like, it's not that she's not smart, it's not relevant in her life and her survival. So that's a huge thing to reconcile, you know, in your mind. And there's a loneliness in that because there's not a lot of people who have the chance to sort of do those two things and be in that middle place. But I've just accepted that's kind of who I am, you know, and so I embrace it.
Thank you. I have to wrap up, but one of the things I would suggest is please reach out to our panelists. You know, don't bombard them when they come off the stage or anything, but you guys are all here for the entire weekend. You know their names, you have an alumni directory. If you have questions, please reach out. I totally said that without asking their permission. I hope they're okay with that. So very quickly, I want to tell you guys about an incredible program that my colleague, Wendy Webster Coakley, organizes every year. It's called ETH Meetup at Reunion. It's a casual, come-as-you-are career networking program that really emphasizes not only the importance but the value of the Williams Alumni Network, specifically for our career and pursuing our passions. There are different professional areas, but also an area for people who are transitioning either into new careers or back into the world of work after being out of the world of work for various reasons. So please, if you do have time, stop over. It's in Pareski. There will be drinks. It definitely is the hour where you can start to do that. But thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you again to our speakers.